Hello, I'm Jack Rickard. This is Electric Vehicle Television, EVTV. I'm here by myself again this week. Brian has gone to Florida. It's with his bride. It is Christmas week here, actually. My wife's gone. Brian's gone. I'm kind of here by myself again. And so I'll do the show. I just have a couple of things to introduce this week. Not a lot of big stuff going on. We did have a note this week from Tesla that they had been once again verified as a very safe car by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and fire-free. Meanwhile, I noted last week that there was a garage fire, and some tips about that. Interestingly, Tesla, who is not responsible for it and didn't cause it, has nevertheless come up with a cure for it. And that brings up some interesting things you can do in software that sort of are a pointer as to what's so different about Tesla from the other auto manufacturers. When the other auto manufacturers have a problem with their software, you normally get a recall notice and have to take your car into the dealer, schedule an appointment, leave the car there typically. Sometimes you'll get a loaner. And all they do is hook it up to a computer and reflash the vehicle control unit. This is our generalized vehicle control unit. I just got in. We can't, it's powder coated, so we can't do the laser etch that Paul did. So we had some little plaques printed up that we'll put on there with the pinouts. I thought that was so cool. Anyway, that's the procedure for updating the software in your car if it's a Nissan Leaf or a Chevrolet Volt. Tesla actually has a GSM chip in the car to talk over the cellular telephone system, in theory onto the internet, but more commonly to Tesla itself. And we get regular software updates to the car where they change things and don't really even tell us a whole lot about what they've changed. We'll just go out in the garage, get in the car, and it tells us that it has updated the software. In some cases, that's a good thing. Some a bad one, we had an update, and our center console was completely black. And we had to call Tesla. And what they had me do was reboot the system, which was press the two buttons at the top of the steering wheel until the center display went out in front of you, and then press the two selector knobs on the steering wheel simultaneously until they came up. And we basically rebooted the computer and brought it back up and then had our center console. That was the fix, all done by talking to a nice young man on the phone. And the whole process took less than 5 minutes from dialing the phone till we were up and running. I told you last week that the problem wasn't with the car, and it wasn't with the charger, but it could very well be a high resistance point in the wiring, or wiring that was simply too small. Interestingly, Tesla immediately figured out, fairly cunningly, that if you do have too small a wiring, or you do have a high resistance connection somewhere in your line, anywhere, that normally when you're charging the car, and Tesla charger, of course, has access to exactly the voltage of the AC coming in and exactly the amount of current. And so they could very easily measure the voltage at no current and turn the charger on and measure it under a load. Now, the kind of load, even up to 100 amps, that charging a Tesla would put on the grid would not significantly decrease the voltage from the grid. Through the charging cable and the charging connector, there is a possibility of a small voltage drop where they'd have 240 volts measured and they turn it on and it's charging at 100 amps and they measure 239.2 VAC, something on that order. But it would be fairly easy to set a threshold that was somewhat below that based on the amount of current and the amount of voltage drop. And if you're beyond this voltage drop, that indicates you're either having a big drop through your house wiring, or there's something wrong with the connector, which is possible that it was damaged. Somebody hit it with a claw hammer in the garage, or that there's a high resistance connection somewhere in the line. They can detect this by comparing the voltage and the current. If they add more current and the voltage drops, it's being dropped across some resistance. And so it's very easy for them to tell, even if it's a house wiring problem that's not theirs. And so then they can terminate the charge and direct you to check your wiring and connections. And that's what they did. I wish this company was a little more open and sharing, but they're not. They're very closed. Otmar, Abenhake, that we have, Otmar, we have kind of followed and even showed a time-lapse video of him pulling the engine out of his Stretchla, which is the Stretch Vanagon Type 3 VW, and receiving his wrecked Tesla Model S, which he bought for half the price of a real Model S. He said he got it half off, and it was the front half that was mostly off. This week, he's actually expanded his repertoire, apparently with a pretty good quality video camera, and doing some introduction and some notes as to what he's doing to marry a wrecked Tesla Model S and this Stretch Vanagon. And I think it's a fascinating tale. Let's take a look.
Hi, I'm Otmar, and I'm working on a new project. I'm a longtime Volkswagen camper nut, and I also like electric vehicles, and I've decided to combine the two together and make a project that I'm calling the Stretchla. The Stretchla because I'm starting with a stretched Volkswagen Vanagon camper that I've been using for about 12 years for camping. And the La is part of a Tesla. This Tesla Model S that I'm sitting in is going to become the donor for the components to make this whole system run. I'm planning to use pretty much everything out of the Tesla, everything from the dashboard to the drive system to the charging and all that sort of stuff. So this Tesla, though, has had a bit of a rough life, right? It's been in a major accident. I got it half off. The front half was what was off, and so that made it a lot less expensive, but it still needs some work just to get it running at all. Been having a little trouble just trying to get the wheels to turn, and after a few days of looking around and poking at electrical things, we discovered the battery pack isn't even plugged in. So apparently the body shop that worked on it taped over the connections and put the battery pack back in place. The connections for this are on top of the battery pack. So in order to reconnect it, we're going to have to drop the battery pack, inspect it, make sure it's in good shape, clean it all up, and put it back in. So that's our goal for today. And my friend Debbie is here, and she's going to help me try to drop it. And we'll see how it goes. Well, that was fun. The battery pack's out of the Model S. Thanks to Debbie, who came over and donated her afternoon to help remove the battery pack. We've pulled it out, set it on a table here, and I've realized that there's a few other things I want to do while the pack's out, so I won't be putting it right back in. There's some damaged brake lines, and this is the perfect time to replace those. A couple things I didn't review before. Lifting the Model S is a bit of a challenge because the lifting pads are relatively small. And so here I'll show you some images of what I did to my bend pack lift pads just to ensure that the car wouldn't slide off of the pads when it was lifted, and wouldn't want that happening, and still provide clearance for the battery pack to slide out in between. So the lifting pads have to be out near the edges to allow clearance in the middle for the battery pack to come down. And of course I was worried that these pads might slide away, you know, the lift feet might slide out, and you certainly don't want a car coming down on you. So Tesla has these wonderful holes in their jack points that allow you to put a pin on your jack and locate that to the car so that there's much more security. So I'll put up these photos here where you can see how I've drilled and tapped into the lift pad and put in a bolt with a nut as a spacer to keep anything from sliding around. The other major concern I have for safety is that this battery pack weighs quite a bit. I don't know exactly how much, but it's probably somewhere around 1,200 to 1,400 pounds, and you certainly don't want that coming down on you. I took one of our welding tables, and thanks to Arthur's help, we upgraded the wheels to some heavier duty wheels that should take the load, but once we actually got the battery pack on there, I was getting nervous. And as you saw in the video there, we rolled a couple of extra toolboxes with 600 pound capacity each under the sides as an extra safety, just in case something were to start to fall or anything like that. Luckily we didn't need them, but we're leaving them in place. And I hope that before I do this a second time, I'll have made a more sturdy, wider structure to hold the pack in place. Basically, it was removing about 34 bolts off the bottom, setting the whole car on the lift, on the rolling cart for the battery, and then we just lift the car off the battery to remove it. And then inspection time, so there's a bunch of gravel in there from when it was traveling across the country, and the brake lines, like I said before, that were damaged in the accident, I need to replace those. So that's the next step. And then once those are fixed, I hope to put the battery pack back in and try it out, see if the wheels will turn. So we'll continue on. All right, next step here. I've spent a number of hours now looking around. It gets kind of interesting trying to diagnose a vehicle with no wiring diagram and no service manual. And so you end up spending a lot of time with a voltmeter and ohm meter and poking around and musing, and luckily I do have a description of the various fuses and where they go. One of the, I may not have mentioned yet, I hooked the battery back up, put it back in, and the car still wouldn't go. It came up with some more dire warnings, like pull over safely, and the usual contact Tesla service, which I get a lot of those on my error messages. So not wanting to find out what the hourly rate is at my local Tesla service center, I just kept plugging along and diagnosing and figuring out what I could find. Hit a bit of a breakthrough. I discovered that the pyrotechnic disconnect that I thought only was for the SRS system to keep it safe and turned off, that it also kills power to the main contactor, which will make the vehicle go at all. So with that reconnected, I push on the brakes and the car wakes up, and The dire warning to pull over safely has gone away. Matter of fact, we're down to merely 7 major errors on the center screen. And with my foot on the brake, I'll put it in drive. The parking brake lets go, and the wheels are turning. So, a little bit of success today, which feels good. Had me worried about the condition of the battery or the whole system. Oh yeah, the wheels don't stop very well because the brakes don't have any fluid in their lines. They were sheared in the accident. Eventually, there we go. The brake will hit, the parking brake. So what else? Yeah, feels good. The battery seems to be in very good shape. It's been sitting for a number of months, and it's still at about 68% capacity. It's showing 180 miles remaining range. I haven't tried plugging in the charger yet, but that's next. And yeah, I feel like a good step's been made here, and the car's one step closer to being drivable. Now that the wheels are spinning, that's very exciting. There's one last thing to check, and that is to see how the charging system works. This vehicle, as you may know, had a little bit of damage on the side, making it impossible to plug the car in while the charge port is installed. So I've temporarily removed the port and mounted it here. Well, not even mounted, it's just hanging out on the inside. It's pretty well insulated, but just in case, we've got gloves and glasses, you know, in case any high voltage events. Highly unlikely, but could happen. So here we go. We have our mobile connector. Push the button, let go, and our charge port pops open, as you can see, and we're ready to plug in. And the moment of truth, we have a green light. That's fantastic. And you can see on the dash, I think, hopefully it'll be charging. We'll see. 39 amps, 240 volt system. It's taking a charge. Thanks for watching. This is, I think, the end of this video update, and I'll report back when there's some more progress.
It's very interesting. We've said for some time that ultimately the manufacturers will catch up with us, and the people who drive manufactured cars will likewise catch up with us. And when they do, they'll start wrecking the cars, and we'll have access to the components. Now, unfortunately, we don't have the wiring diagrams in the books. Everything has to be reverse engineered. We're already getting into that a little bit here at EVTV. We have some, we've had an adventure with the Azure Dynamics, their Siemens motor, DMOC 645, resulting in our year-long development. I've got another week before we get our first 27 of the circuit boards back and can make the generalized electric vehicle control unit available. But I think a huge element of the future is your ability to get, actually I've ordered 10 of the UQM 100 series motors and controllers with e-gear drives and the axles, the front axles from the Coda. Remember, I was going to buy 20 of the cars. We just ran out of room and money around here. And Rick Curtis has volunteered to sell us 10 of the assemblies and pull them out of the cars and send them to us. And we put down a half payment on that and are waiting on those to arrive. And I'm confident we actually have the document defining UQM's CAN bus protocol, and should be able to make a module for our JevQ and get that turning on a test bench fairly quickly. So Otmar is kind of leading the charge here in taking high-quality components from manufactured cars and making them available for us to use in builds. I was in an interesting, actually a not very interesting conversation. There is a Tesla Motors Club, and unfortunately many of the people that are Tesla fanboys are not precisely up to speed with what's going on with electric cars and with the technology. They're enthusiastic, but somewhat all over the map. And they had a couple of them holding forth in very superior tones, comparing their Tesla Model S to the efforts of individuals converting ICE cars to electric drive. And, for example, they believe that's all still done with lead, still has a 25-mile range, and so forth. When I attempted to correct this and went on at length about what is going on out there, i.e. with you all, then they very smoothly gravitated at, when I pointed out I drove a Escalade that's electric and prefer it for my personal ride, to my Model S, which I also own. They rather smoothly converted that to that I was one of a kind and there were no others in the world, and I just didn't realize how grungy the crowd was that does their own cars. And so you recall I had announced we're going to do a book and are working still somewhat behind the curve here. It's taken a little longer than I would like for our online registry to come together, where you can upload photos of your builds and so forth. And we're going to take 100 of those builds and actually put them in a book, because people actually don't realize the breadth and depth of how many very excellent vehicle builds there are out there that people are doing and are completely unaware of your existence. They should watch this more. Anyway, I'm kind of excited to follow Otmar's progress. He's essentially going to transplant the entire Model S down to the dashboard into a Vanagon, stretch Vanagon, and so be able to drive across country and use the Tesla Supercharge network, and has expressed the intent to not only have it done, but to drive it to EVCON 2014 here in August. I think it starts August the 12th, so I'm glad to see him off and running on it. Of course, he's going to have some adventure in unwinding how all that works well enough to at least transplant it. And we've got another little buddy, Jehu Garcia, reporting from California. Recall I said he'd picked up a Chevy Bolt. Well, that requires a J1772 connection, and Jehu is the picture of thrift in all cases, and so he has decided to build his own J1772 electric vehicle service equipment, or EVSE. Let's take a look at what he's put together.
This week's episode of the Electric Samba Bus, we're going to show you how to install a level 2 charging station, an EVSE for our Chevy Volt. So the first thing you notice when you bring home a store-bought EV is that, well, you have to charge it. And the standard equipment takes forever. Level 1 charging takes about 20 hours to charge it. So you have to bring that down to a manageable 4 hours. And the only way to do that is to get a level 2 EVSE charging station installed in your garage. Commercially available units are great, except for two things. One, they're about $600, and two, they only charge at 7.5 kilowatts, which is great right now, but it doesn't leave you much room to improve when newer cars come up and they can charge quicker. Luckily, paying full price for a unit that will become obsolete in the next couple of years is not our only option. A quick Google search reveals a multitude on open source EVSE projects. From the most basic units using off-the-shelf components to the full feature custom design units, they all share one thing in common. They'll allow you to play a more active role in the assembly and installation of your car's charging equipment, which is very satisfying. If you've been following my electric SAMBA bus project, you'll know that I've decided to use several open source products. Both my instrumentation and my charger are from a company here in California called Electric Motorwork. The reason I've chosen to buy from them is because their feature to price ratio is off the charts. Every single one of their products is open source, which allows you to keep making the product better, and it will not become obsolete as quickly as the store-bought items. Plus, not to mention, they're an American company manufacturing products here in the good old US of A. The assembly process of this EVSE is pretty straightforward. It'll require some basic tools and some basic knowledge of soldering and just assembly in general. Valerie has even have a real-time video tutorial on how to put it together. The base edition of this EVSE, which is the one I chose, sells for only $149, but you do have to purchase both the input and the output cables, which sell for around $150. I was lucky enough to find a used J1772 plug on eBay for $129, and that's the one that I will be using. Okay, so here's our EVSE. It's nice and completed. It's all put together. It's got the input cable, it's got the output cable. The only thing left for us to do is to drill a couple of holes through the center here, and then install it in the wall. I'm just gonna drill a couple of holes, put through screws through the wood stud, and it's gonna stay there because it's gonna be kind of a permanent installation. So let's do this. Just somewhere in the middle. It's not even that critical where the hole goes, you know, it's just somewhere in the middle. So the unit, here's the plug that I'm gonna use to charge this thing. I'm thinking about putting it here since there's a drywall, a wood stud is running through this wall here. So I wanna make sure that I put those screws right on that, because if you just screw it onto drywall, the panel box, the electrical panel box is right behind here, so you don't want to screw in there. But if it wasn't, you don't want to screw directly into drywall without having some kind of anchor in there, so that so you can hold some of the weight. This thing doesn't weigh a lot, but it might get yanked out and stuff through, you know, while you're connecting it to the car. So we're gonna do it right on directly on this stud, and you just gotta make sure that you have enough. Yeah, perfect. There we go. I think I found 2.5 inch drywall screws. So the 1.25 inch were too small, so let's try this 2.5. Take that one out. Oh yeah. There we go. Oh yeah, that's pretty solid in there. So I'm gonna plug it in. The 60 amp breakers that I had installed on this circuit are off right now. So I will go on the other side and turn them on. All right, so it did like a little thing in there. It clicked once. Don't really know why, but it did. The power supply is on. I can see the LED. You don't want to touch any of this stuff. This is live right now. This is, you know, that's 240 volts right there. So okay, So we don't have our Chevy Volt here, and I can't really test it with my SAMBA because it doesn't have a charger right now, and even if it did, I don't have a plugged in there to be able to plug it in there. So now we're gonna disconnect it and then cover it up. Last thing to do is to put this little sticker on there. Make sure you put it straight. So I also bought this little holder from eBay for like 20 bucks or whatever. It's just a plastic thing that you can, so you don't leave this just hanging out, you know, somewhere. You could also just use that. Again, probably gonna end up putting it right here since this is the stud and I wanted to kind of grab something solid. Here's the plug. That concludes our installation of our EVSE. It's 240 volts, level 2 charging. 60 amps, that equals 15 kilowatts. Of course, our car only charges at 3.3 kilowatts at this moment, but the cool thing about having this is that it's ready for the next generation of cars that will do up to, you know, 7 kilowatts, 10 kilowatts, all the way up to 15 kilowatts. That's for the next few years as the cars keep getting better and better. This unit is, we're good up to 15 kilowatts. So there we go. Now the next thing is just to test it out with their Chevy Volt. Eventually everything tested out good, so total success. Also, our brand new license plates just showed up in the mail, so I installed them. I also installed that HP EVS license plate frame. Doesn't it look good? That's what I think of the old one. Almost lost our wheel right here.
So you can see he can do 60 amps, and that's about 14.4 kilowatts at 240 volts AC, and that should be more than enough to charge the Volt, but ultimately his SAMBA bus at a somewhat higher rate. You might note I was talking about the wiring and so forth in the house, and Jehu's looks slightly alarming. However, distance covers a lot of sins. What he didn't show very well was his electrical panel is on the other side of the same wall at the same place. He's not running a foot of electrical wiring from his panel to that connector, and so that kind of diminishes the heat and voltage drop along the length of the cable when the cable's a foot long. And then he's got another foot from the one that he plugs in into his unit there. So I guess he never did quite total up all the expenses. His kit was $150. The plug was $150, so he's at $300. He had another little extension cable there, but it's certainly less than the $700 or $800 we see for commercial units. I actually use a GE watt station. They were $1,000. I think they've come down a bit. And I found two 30-amp fuses in them that were ordinary bus fuses. I just went to the hardware store and got two 50s and put that in there. And the system seems well able to handle it. And so after blowing a fuse on my watt station, I simply replaced it with a larger fuse. Okay, not precisely the thing to do, but I'm somewhat familiar with my wiring and what it can handle. I think there's a little overhead in the cord and plug on the watt station, and so I replaced it with a larger fuse from the hardware store, and it works just fine. One of the guys that came to our first EVCon is a fellow named Kriss. He kind of goes back and forth between Washington and Florida. He actually teaches at, I think, the University of Miami. Sometimes he was on the cabinet of Mitt Romney in Massachusetts when Mitt was the governor there. He started by replicating our Speedster build and built a Speedster, which is very nice, and I think he's got available if anybody would like to buy one. He's since done a SAAB Sonnet, and I went on at some length about the book that he published, which was basically a revised version of the original owner's manual showing his electric work in it, and I just found it a fascinating document of his car. And in fact, Eric is very good at documenting things. Anyway, Eric did a wiki for one of the Factory 5 models that had very detailed instructions on how to do the entire build. I mean, with photographs and down to nuts, bolts, individual wires. He's very good at documenting things. He came to the last EVCon and did a presentation that was kind of basic. It was sort of how to plan to do your electric vehicle build. And I was startled to see that a significant percentage of our EVCon attendees had not yet built an electric car. And this was a very popular session. I've been corresponding with him recently and had mentioned that he's going to do a Jaguar Mark II conversion. And this is his 42-page Jaguar Mark II conversion thesis. He actually does a market analysis of the price of the cars, the price of the parts, the ICE parts that you would have available to sell after purchasing the car and converting it, and very in-depth examinations of what kind of drivetrains, what motors, headlights, LED headlights, dash modifications, and so forth that he would want to do. He's got a 42-page document that's not yet completed that he's doing. Now, I have to point out, the man hasn't bought the Jaguar Mark II yet. He's still shopping for one. But he's shopping rather knowledgeably at this point with a very good sense of what the market is for these cars and what they cost, and wanting to do that conversion. He had looked at a Factory 5 818, but he's just kind of at the age where that looks kind of like a kid's car, and this Jaguar Mark II would look very much like a grown-up's version of an electric car build. And so I find this much more attractive myself, personally, as a car. It's kind of like I liked Brandon Hollinger's London Taxi. In any event, this is a little strange, but Anna Kluppenberg, our Admiral of the Seas in Amsterdam, had captured his presentation at EVCon on these basic planning elements as shown in this Jaguar Mark II conversion thesis. And so it's an hour, but it was so well received. This is Christmas week. I don't have that much of a show for you. I'm going to put this up and let you see at least part of it. And we'll probably take this document with Eric's permission and put it up on the blog next week so you can actually download it and see the detail he goes into in analyzing whether or not to do a conversion of the Jaguar Mark II. Let's go to Eric, Kriss, and some actually very valuable pointers for those of you considering a build to take a look at.
And we're here with Eric Kriss of Kriss Motors with two of his cars, a 1969 SAAB Sonnet and a 1957 Porsche Speedster. These two cars are a little bit different than they were back in the day. Want to tell us why?
Well, they're electric.
Electric?
engine, front-wheel drive. Those kind of things are perfect for electric cars. The electric motors are so compact and so efficient that if you can get the whole thing crammed into one place,
that's the best way to do it.
The best way to do it.
If some SAAB engineers from the 60s had time traveled and come back with new technology, this is the Sonnet they would have built.
I think you'll recognize this monster, which is the controller that was in the
other forklift controller. I know all about this stuff now.
All right.
Yeah, that's going to be a forklift.
And this time, there's a big chill plate that goes all the way across. It's a big aluminum piece.
So that whole thing is dissipating heat.
Yep.
It's got a cool name, the chill plate. It's just chill.
And it's really a heat sink more than, it's not, because there's no fluid that's going through it. It's really...
Yeah, but I like calling it a chill plate.
Would be great. You've got batteries on either side here. You'll notice they're a gray color, not yellow.
I did notice that.
That's because these are 100 amp hour batteries instead of 200.
What else are these batteries used in?
You know what the Chinese use them for?
Do I want to know?
They're submarine fleet.
Really?
Yeah, the Chinese...
You've got Chinese submarine batteries in a 69 SAAB Sonnet.
You've got the motor. This is the original SAAB transmission. You know, so this thing is balanced almost exactly like the original.
The guff that you said that you get from Porsche people over that, I would think that SAAB people would love this, because SAAB people inherently love weirdness.
Yeah.
And this is taking kind of a weird among the SAAB's car and making it even better.
I took out all the old instrumentation. It's all new digital instrumentation. I completely reconfigured that. It's the original dash. These are not that hard to build. You know, engines are very complicated. Electric motors are very simple. This has 2 connections. This is all some of my working drawings.
But again, you're saying you're not an engineer?
No.
And you're cranking out these plans and...
No, that's a...
And you just sort of... You just picked this up in the course of your...
Yeah, you kind of learn how to do it bit by bit. You know, when you focus enough
your time in the Chinese Navy? It seems like right now, what made sense for you, cars that were extremely lightweight in the first place and not crazily overpowered either. Right. Do you think that the success of mainstream electric cars like the Leaf and Tesla and Volt are making things available that weren't available before for people like you who want to do this?
A lot of people who bought the mainstream electric cars have in fact been do-it-yourselfers.
Yeah.
And I think some people are going to look at Leafs and Volts and Teslas and get interested in the future.
It is a strange experience that you're surrounded by old car and yet you're hearing the future. You know, my frame of reference for electrics is things like that, like a Tesla, where it seems crazily futuristic right now, and this is making those sorts of noises, and you know that sort of feedback from the gauges and everything, and yet you're surrounded by a 1969 SAAB. It's a cool combination.
It's in the details, and Kriss is a master of detail focus and has an interest in kit cars and custom cars you build at home, predating his interest in electric vehicles, actually, and has done several. And the SAAB Sonnet, I think you want to take a look at. It's kind of a marvel. And he's here today to share some of that with us, probably under the auspices of Kriss Motors more than anything else. Would you all please give a warm welcome to Kriss.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack. I wanted to ask before I got started, how many of you have yet to build an EV? Okay, that's at least half, I think. And this is, what I'm going to be talking about is really more aimed at you than the rest of you who have already gone about it and built at least one EV, and some of you are very, very advanced. I want to talk in a much less technical way. I'm not even going to hardly mention batteries, about some of the things you've got to grapple with as you really think about how do you actually build this car, and particularly one, I say your dream EV, because how do you build a car that you really want to drive? Maybe 5 years ago or 4 years ago, the issue was, can you build an EV? And I think we're beyond that. Now it's, can you build the EV you really want to drive around? as opposed to just put some batteries in a motor. Can you hear me, by the way? This keeps going on and in and out. Okay, great. A little bit about some of the things I've done. I actually wanted to build an EV, and I got very serious about it in 2008, 2007, 2008. And the car I wanted to build was an electric Cobra. I somehow convinced my wife that I had to build a gas-powered one first before I could build an electric one. And I went ahead and did that. And as I began researching back in those early days, sort of like the dark ages, of how would you actually build an electric Cobra, I had never heard of iron phosphate batteries. I'd never heard of AC motors. I didn't really, I really didn't know what a controller was. But I quickly kind of convinced myself that I'd never get the power that I needed for a Cobra out of the current technology, because I was putting in an engine that was about almost 400 horsepower. And I just didn't, I looked around, I couldn't find an electric motor and batteries. All I knew about were lead-acid batteries that was going to do that. So one day, searching the internet, I found this guy out in Missouri who was talking about, on a video, I think it was the very first video that he did, was talking about this beautiful speedster and how these batteries made it possible. And I was listening to this video, and I think I watched the video about 8 times, and finally my wife came into my office and said, "Who is this guy? And what are you doing?" And so that kind of led me to copy Jack and do a Beck Speedster. Very much along the lines of the second one that he did with the AC50, using 36 cells. I think I got the only shipment I've ever heard of the 200 amp hour Thunder Skies. And I've asked all kinds of other people, who has those in their car? Anybody here has a 200 amp hour? You do. Okay, well, we must have been the only 4 shipments that were there. They're kind of, so that's in the car, and then I decided to do convert a car, which was my 1969 SAAB Sonnet, using again the AC50 motor, this time with 100 calbs, and now I'm thinking seriously about doing the Factory 5, the same company that builds the Cobra kit. Doing their new car called the 818, and that's based on Subaru running gear, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But what I wanted to start out with was some extremely fundamental things that may seem redundant or obvious, but it's kind of things that I wish somebody had mentioned to me maybe 5 years ago, because it probably would have saved me about 3 years. So I'm going to very quickly go through these, and some of the process that I go through. I am a little obsessive, and maybe I do things in more detail than is necessary, but so be it. Just in terms of planning tools, you can do an awful lot with almost no money, seriously planning what you're going to build. And I know this seems incredibly simplistic, but your best friend's a digital camera. You can't take too many pictures of your car. My wife looked at my huge file of photographs and she said, "Where's the family?" Because I think I've got about 6,000, photographs of parts and cars, and I have a couple of my the family. So, but you can take a lot of pictures. They really help. Straight rulers, very helpful. Get a few plastic ones, because you do not want to use a metal ruler across the terminals of the battery. That's a good safety tip. And a tape measure. I love this little digital laser measure. There's a bunch of them. It's the most expensive thing I've got up here. You can get it from Home Depot. And it's a great way to measure things in the chassis, measure things in the car, where it's inconvenient to have a tape measure. You can't reach. Maybe you want to go through a hole. You want to go through a narrow opening. It's very helpful. An angle finder, very helpful. Digital caliper, essential. You're going to want to measure a lot of stuff. And finally, you need a calculator. Almost everybody's got an iPhone or something like that these days. This has got a camera, and it's got a calculator, and actually, it's even got things for doing your alignment. So that's, it doesn't really cost much to, once you have a phone to do all this stuff. In terms of planning applications, sort of doing documents and apps, you're going to want to do a fair number of documents. Just so, if you're like me, I forget everything a day later. So there's going to be some spreadsheets and Word documents, going to write things down, things about vendors. And I'm an open source guy. I like LibreOffice, Google Docs, things like that. Conceptual drawings, I think you're going to want to do a lot of drawings that are not really CAD drawings, but are specific enough that you can really kind of map out what you want to do in the vehicle. I like Diagram Studio. It's the best thing I've found for doing wiring diagrams and for doing just conceptual drawings. It's much easier than a CAD system. You can learn to use this in probably about 30 minutes or less, and there's a free download. You need to do some image editing, superimpose things to help in your planning. I'll show you a couple of examples. Pixlr, I don't even know how you pronounce it, .com is a free thing, and or you can go buy a copy of Photoshop, maybe you already have that. And finally, if you get serious enough, you're going to want to do some CAD 2D drawings, if for no other reason than to make them machine shop ready so you can get some parts made and reduce the cost. I do a fair amount of work with a machine shop that's near my garage, and there's a big difference between the guys who walk in with something on the back of a napkin, and believe me, people do, or walking in with pretty much finished drawings. And it's a lot, you basically are saving the expense of having the machinist try to figure out what the hell it is you want to build. My favorite piece of software for doing 2D CAD is called DraftSight. It's made by a company, a French company, great company, Dassault Systems, and they're the people who, in their 3D modeling, it's a very popular piece of software called SolidWorks. For those, most of you here are engineers. I think probably half of you are mechanical engineers, and I'm sure you're very familiar with SolidWorks. For those of you not intimately familiar with the world of digital machining, I just want to spend 30 seconds and just kind of giving you the lingo so that when you go to a machine shop and they're throwing around some terms or something, you're not completely bewildered. But it starts out on the design side, which is the blue circle. And that's what we call CAD, computer-aided design. Most of you are quite familiar with that. And again, SolidWorks and DraftSight are the leading piece of software, and DraftSight's free. So you might as well learn it. It's the same kind of system, basically the same menu system, the same structure as SolidWorks, so you'll be a real leg up. And when you have a spare hour in the evening, you can play around and learn how to draw stuff. That's only the beginning. Then it has to go over into a translation step, which is generally called CAM, computer-aided manufacturing. What that's really doing is figuring out how to take a 2 or even a 3D drawing and what the machine is really going to do. What is it cut first? What holes are drilled first? What edges are finished first? In what order? And where is that tool really kind of moving around? And then finally it goes to what's called a post-processing, which is turning this into the G code, which is what a milling machine or a lathe actually understands and goes through the steps to perform what you're doing. So it's, I think, helpful to just know this so that when you're thinking about getting parts machined, you can have a more intelligent conversation with the machinist. Where do I start? I'm a believer in starting with the platform, and in automotive lingo, that means the vehicle. The vehicle without a motor or an engine, maybe without a transmission, but with a suspension system and with brakes and with an interior and seats and windows and stuff like that. That's the platform. Sometimes people say, come up to me and say, well, I really love this motor, and I'm going to get this motor. And to me, that's like saying I'm going to buy furniture before you buy the house. So I think you ought to start with the platform. In my particular case, And again, what you really want to build and kind of your dream EV is going to completely be all over the map from you want a big truck to be able to haul something or whatever. I like to drive light, small, fast cars, and that's kind of what I'm into. So I was looking for a platform that was lightweight. By that I mean under 2,000 pounds, pretty much is a two-seater. And then I had these other kind of requirements. I like fiberglass bodies. They're a little easier to change a few things than sometimes metal is. Sufficient space for batteries. When you are talking about a kit, there's a lot of kits that are manufactured are based on what's called a donor car. For those of you who are not familiar with the kit industry, a donor car means a regular car that you then buy and cannibalize, taking certain parts out of it, primarily the motor, the engine, and the transmission, and then throwing away the rest of it or sending it to the junkyard. The advantage of that is that sometimes you can get a single car donor. For example, Factory 5 in the Cobra, the donor is a Mustang. So if you just get a Mustang, you've got all the other parts to, with a few little things that they kind of leave out. But you've pretty much got all the other parts to have a drivable car by taking the kit plus the harvested parts from the donor. The disadvantage is that you're using parts that have a sometimes unknown usage pattern. You might have a transmission with 140,000 miles on it. You might have an engine with a blown gasket. You might have all kinds of things that you don't really know until you get into it. So there's been, over the past maybe 4 or 5 years, the rise of the non-donor kit, which basically relies on the aftermarket to find parts that are new. Sometimes they're from China or Mexico, and sometimes the quality is horrible. But if you're careful, you can actually build a car with completely all new parts and avoid the donor, which is the non-donor method. And my Cobra, I decided to do that way. So I didn't have a Mustang. I got the parts, and they're all brand new. So I was particularly looking for a non-donor kit or an existing vehicle in really good shape. And finally, I was looking to spend under $25,000 on the platform. That may strike some of you as a lot, because I know there's a lot of people looking around for a $1,000 platform or, you know, rusted out 40-year-old VW Beetle with no rear windshield and no rear window. And, well, you can do that. But if you want to have a dream car that you really want to drive around, you'll spend thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of dollars fixing up the car. That's a whole nother project. If you want to go into car restoration, that's great. But this particular thing, I was looking to not do that. Oh, one other point. Maybe I'm an obsessive planner, but I've found that in all the projects I've done, really literally about half the time I'm planning, about half the time I'm building and testing. So there's really a lot of planning, unless you're simply doing and copying something that somebody else has done. I piggybacked on Jack a lot for the Speedster, and I think the component I had in planning was way down because I think he put in 10,000 hours, but unless you've got that advantage, you're going to do a lot of planning. After picking the platform, I think the most important thing to do to avoid being disappointed when you're done is to figure out what really is your technical objective. What are you trying to do with this car that constitutes the fact that it's your dream? And when I started out with the Porsche, because I really like classic historical vehicles, I really wanted an electric car that was exactly like the gas-powered version. I wanted it to shift the same. I wanted it to feel the same. I wanted it to be a little less noisy. That would be nice. But other than that, I wanted it to be exactly like a Porsche Speedster. I wanted to drive like a 1950s sports car with the crazy swing axle and everything else. And watching what Jack had done convinced me that this was really possible, given the technology of approximately 2009, 2010. And so, and I'm very pleased with this car. I love this car because it drives just like a Porsche, and that's what I wanted. For the 1969 SAAB Sonnet, which I have had for a long period of time and know intimately very well, I actually wanted it to have more power because it's a little bit underpowered, always was from day one. It's a crazy, great little car to drive, great autocross car. But, you know, it's got 60 horsepower, 57 horsepower. To be honest, it's probably 52 horsepower. I don't know what it really is, but it's not very punchy. And I wanted to have an electric car that looked just like the original, handled at least as well, and had some punch to it. So I wanted to exceed the original ICE requirements. And I've done that, and it's great. I mean, this is the best Sonnet to drive, I think, in the world because it's electric. They should have made them that way originally if they could have, but you know, it's a great car. The thing I'm thinking about now is matching a current high-performance car. Much tougher. You know, the envelope has moved a lot. We've moved the goalpost, so to speak. So I'm looking at the 2014 Factory 5 818, and I'll talk about that. It is based on the running gear of a Subaru WRX, Subaru Impreza. For those of you who know the Subaru, I think the years are 2002 to 2007 is what Factory 5 is looking to use. And they're basing this on a single car donor, as I described before. They want you to go find or own already a 2002, 2007 WRX, or go to some junkyard and find one that's all smashed up so you can harvest the parts or buy one off of eBay or something like that. So as I was planning this, and this is the bleeding edge, the question was, well, what kind of motor battery combination can I get in there that's going to fit in the redesigned chassis and body, which I'll show you in a moment, that's going to actually match the or exceed the high performance standards that we have today. And so I was looking at the dual AC35s. I also looked at the AC50, which I love in the other two cars, and packing it with 46 or 48 Calb 100s. Now, I'm feeling comfortable about that because the 818 stands for 818 kilograms, which is 1,800 pounds. And my Sonnet with me in it is 1,800 pounds. And I have 100 Calbs in that. And I tend to drive a little fast. And my range is about 55 miles with the Calb 100s. If I was really driving carefully to maximize my range, I think my range is about 75 miles. And I figured that, you know, 50 some odd miles in an 818 is fine for me, for what I'm looking for. So I'm comfortable with the lower weight because I want to keep the weight down to the design weight of approximately 1,800 pounds. Here's some planning you can do. That's the 818 up in the corner. That's what the front of the car looks like. And so this is just back of the envelope. You don't need to buy anything. You can do your research on the web. Thanks to what you guys have done with your website, it's now you can actually get this data a lot easier. Although I'm not sure this is the current data, so take this as directional and not exact. But what I've done is simply taken performance figures off of a dyno for theoretically what the 818 would be like with the dual 35s running at about 1,000 amps versus the turbo WRX in the Subaru. Now the Subaru actually has two different engines. One is turbo, one is non-turbo, a 2.5 and a 2.0, and then a 2.5 turbo. And they have fairly different horsepower and torque profiles. And I know what's going to happen to, you can build an 818 with a non-turbo. It's probably going to be a great car, probably a really good car. But I was a little greedy and I thought, well, how close can I actually get to a turbo version? And so this is the back of the envelope where you can see that up to about, what do I have there? About 2,500 RPM. The dual 35s trump everything in terms of torque. And I mean, it's great. Now, that's only up to 2,500 RPM. After that, actually the turbo's a little bit better. But the dual 35s are better than the non-turbo ice in the Subaru. So it's kind of an open question about whether does that 10 or 15%, is that going to really matter when you get out into the car in the real world? One thing I've learned kind of painfully is you can draw the charts you want, and you get in the car, and you know it's kind of different. There's so many parameters to think about. So this is just directional in terms of, you know, how is it going to be. But this gives me confidence that given the current technology we have today, I'll be able to get pretty close and maybe actually achieve parity performance with a high-performance, modern sports car. That's pretty awesome. And it's not going to cost $107,000. It's pretty awesome. Okay, so how do you go about this once you've got your platform, once you pretty much have a general idea what's going to go in there? What do you do? Well, first thing I do is, where is it going to fit? What do I put where? And I just go through a pretty simple process. I've taken lots of pictures and using those image editors to kind of put little pieces of stuff, and I do it from different angles, and I measure a lot of stuff. And at the end of the day, after doing this for several hours, yeah, it's going to fit, or it's going to almost fit, I'm not quite sure, or it's not going to fit at all. And you do that enough and you solve the problem. So at first I thought I was going to put more batteries in the front. No, that's not going to work. I've got to put them in the back. Okay, I thought I'd put them here in the back. No, that's not going to work. I'm going to have to put them over here too. And you just kind of iteratively go through the problem until you solve it. Once you do that, then you can take that conceptual drawing stuff and you can start drawing out. Now, this is not CAD. You don't have to get real specific for a machinist. But you start drawing out, okay, what do these components really look like? How am I actually going to mount this motor? Where are the struts that I need, and where are they going to hit the chassis? And you just kind of work through this. If you stand back and you look at a car you want to convert or you want to build a kit, and you say, you can get completely overwhelmed with the 10,000 decisions you have to make. But if you actually kind of do it just step by step and grind away at it, it's really, I find, it solves itself really over time. It's not that tough. That leads you to a couple of issues you're going to have to address right up front. One is, how do you mount an electric motor to a transmission? Because almost certainly you're going to have to do that. If you're fortunate enough to have made a decision to build a car that somebody has already mounted to the transmission you're going to use, for example, there's some, Jack's got some great mounts for the AC50 or for the Warp 9s mounted to VW and Porsche transmissions, then you don't have this problem. That's just pretty much a plug and play. In the case of the Sonnet, in the case of the Subaru with the Subaru transmission, this is a problem to be solved, a problem you can easily overcome, but it's an issue you've got to address. So I started out taking a lot of photographs. This is a superimposed photograph of the engine superimposed over the bell housing, and then drawn in what I thought my plate was going to be, my mounting plate, between the motor and the transmission, and then thinking about what kind of side mounts do I want for stability, what else, what are my clearance issues, and you begin to iterate through how this is really going to work. And do you have enough space? Do you have to change some of the, hopefully you don't have to modify the chassis, but if you do, how do you modify it in the least possible way? And then that turns into, after you've got these photos and you think you know what you're doing, you start doing some conceptual drawing. I was helped here because HPVS has actually some very nice drawings of the motors. So it's pretty easy to, you don't have to replicate all that, you copy it off their website. And so here I'm superimposing my first cut at what my front motor mount is going to be. In the Sonnet transmission is not anchored very well. It's got a rear single point mount and a very flimsy side mount. And actually it is hopefully being supported by huge engine mounts, except that I decided to mount something in the front of the motor to secure it. But I had to figure out how that was going to work and how it was going to fit in. So this is just pre-planning. I haven't spent a penny going to a machine shop, but you can send out these little plans to your 3 or 4 or 2 favorite machinists and say, okay, what's this going to cost? And when you get a ballpark estimate, what I usually do is then go back and do a detailed drawing and say, okay, now what's it going to cost? And that way you can pretty triangulate pretty quickly on what that's going to be. It also helps to identify issues right away. I don't know, how many of you are deeply familiar with the Subaru? That's what I thought. I didn't know anything about the Subaru. It was like, you know, I knew about Fords, I knew about the SAAB, I knew about British cars, the Porsche, Chevys, you know, a little bit about, you know, Chryslers. Subarus was like foreign territory for me. And I was totally shocked when I got into this to learn that the flywheel is not in the bell housing. The flywheel is in the motor casing. And now, you could stand back and say, so what? But the so what is that somehow the flywheel has to be encased in your motor mount, and which is it's a non-trivial thing to determine. Also, Factory 5 in the 818 decided to flip the transmission so that actually the front of the transmission was what the rear of the transmission was in the OEM version, which means that the shift for the car is at the rear of the car. Let's see if I can point that out. That's where the shifter is, which means you've got to have a cable that runs the whole way to the front of the car to be able to shift the car. And the reason I mention that is that anytime there's some oddball thing in a conversion, it really means it's a potential vulnerability, because it means it's probably not going to work quite as well as something that was really designed to do that exactly. So in my Cobra, I've got a T5 transmission, and the shifter sits right over the transmission, and it's one piece of metal, and you move it like this, and you move it like that, and it's fantastic. It's a great shift. And I kind of know right away that in the 818, running some crazy cable system all the way through the cockpit, all the way around the car, ending up at the end of the transmission here, I know it's not going to shift probably quite as well as the Cobra, and I'm hoping that I can minimize whatever the problem is, and hopefully the fact that it's an EV doesn't make it worse. But it's just something to be aware of. And when you plan this way, you hopefully will get, you know, like 80% of the issues. There's always going to be something you never thought about, but at least going into this, you know what might be a problem. I can't tell you how many weeks I spent trying to figure out the Subaru transmission and how I was going to do the motor mount, and I have since learned that Seth Bourgeois at what's the name of his company? Rebirth has already, because I talked to Seth, he's decided to make these. So now if you want to do an 818, you don't have to do any of this kind of stuff. Just order it from him, and I think his price is like $1,400. Very, very reasonable for the complexity of what this part is. So sometimes you can get, it's better to be lucky than anything else. So got lucky if you want to do that. Where the battery's going to go. It may seem kind of obvious. I'll put some here, I'll put some there. Actually, I found it is extremely helpful to go through a detailed plan of how you're going to mount the batteries, exactly how they're configured, where the wires are actually going to go. I go to the trouble of actually putting where the straps are. I may be a little obsessive, but the reason why I find this helpful is because there's a lot of other stuff you got to put in this car. And after you put the batteries in, you got to say, where's the fuse going to go? Where's the cutoff switch going to go? Where's the controller going to go? Where's the chill plate going to go? And the more that you have figured out the big things, like where the batteries are going to go, the easier it is to plan for the other stuff. If you kind of just like, well, I'll just put them here and put it there, I think you're going to find that, well, you're going to be redoing it probably a few times. So I tend to do fairly detailed drawings, and I also, on this particular build, had another objective, which was to make the car very lightweight, as lightweight as I could. And so I just decided to not have any battery boxes. I decided to do the whole thing pretty much with aluminum angle bars and 1/8 inch steel rods. I did get a little concerned when the guys from New Zealand started talking about 3 and 20 G-forces and what that was going to do. So I have to go home and do a little bit of serious thinking, but or either pretend I didn't hear that. But in driving around the Sonnet so far, I'm very, very pleased that there has been zero movement of any cell, which is, by the way, better than I can say for the battery boxes that I have in the Porsche. So I was looking for zero movement, very, very rigid, attached to the chassis. And of course, if you're going to do that, it's not a matter of just where the battery boxes go, but actually where you're going to attach them, what are the attachment points to the chassis and everything else. Instrumentation. This is kind of my love-hate topic. If there's one thing I want to say to the HPVS guys is do something about that little gauge. Please do something with that crappy little gauge. You know, it's just like, it's the worst. I love the system. I love everything about it, and I hate that gauge. I even like the programmer, but not the gauge. And so I have to say that we're still in the very early days of EV instrumentation. Hopefully in coming years we'll make huge strides forward. What I decided to do I was kind of half satisfied with how the Porsche turned out in terms of the EV part of the instrumentation. I did a little gauge pod to hold things. It's okay, it's not fabulous. It's not what I call OEM quality. My objective is that somebody looks at this car and says, oh, I didn't know they made this car. They being some big manufacturer, which means that they didn't think that I just cobbled it together in my garage. So I'm looking for a real finished look. And I decided to rip out every single instrument in the SAAB and replace it with all new digital instrumentation. So I have a GPS speedometer. I've got a digital everything. By the way, if you want to do this, a great company to work with is Speed Hut. Speed Hut will create all kinds of gauges for you very reasonably, and they will do custom gauge faces. So actually on mine, you'll see, hopefully you'll see in another photo, it says Sonnet EV on the gauge face. You know, you can put anything you want there. Put your wife's name, and that way she won't be that upset about your budget. But, you know, so you can customize these things. And what I have found very, very helpful, because I don't know any other way, I have to visualize what it's going to look like, because then you're spending big dollars to buy the instrumentation. So what I do is I take a photograph of the original dash and simply superimpose what the new instrumentation is going to look like. You can test out fonts and colors, and the web is fantastic. Like, you can go to Speed Hut and get the actual image of the gauge and manipulate it any way you want, and then a little bit of your image you know, editing, and you can create a dashboard. So this was one of my early versions of what this dashboard was going to look like. It looks very much like that. Not exactly, because I changed a few things, but it gives you a pretty good idea of where you're going to go. And it's well worth the effort, I think. That's the GPS speedometer right there. And up there, where was an air vent, I put the little antenna for the GPS. And by the way, I'm a big fan of GPS speedometers now, super fan, because not only does it give you very accurate speed and all the other stuff that a speedometer is supposed to do, but it's electronic in the sense that you press little buttons and it gives you automatic. You don't want to test your 1/8 mile. You don't want to do a 1/4 mile. You want to do I don't know what you're like, but I'm in the car. I got a stopwatch. I'm trying to do this. I'm not like I'm not a professional like. I'm just trying to do this in the car, and usually my wife doesn't want to go with me because she thinks it's boring to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So she says, honey, you just take the car and you do that. So fortunately with this little GPS speedometer, you just press a button, and when you're ready to go, you go. When you finish, you just press a button and there's your readout. That's really cool. Anyway, you could do that in a regular car. It doesn't have to be an EV. A couple things just to think about. Are the human factors with the dashboard, and can you read this stuff, especially that little gauge from the Curtis gauge. You have to have a magnifying glass and I don't know what to see that thing, especially in sunlight. So I decided to take that gauge, this is an indented part of the dash. You can't really see it. And I said, well, I'm going to put it there. It's where a clock used to be. And at least in sunlight, or in most sunlight, there's a little bit of a shadow and you can actually see the gauge. This is the JDL 404. It's really bright. And you don't really, that's easy to see from anywhere. Can you reach this stuff? Can you, can you do that? And then I also decided to do a push-button start. I'm a form, follows function guy, so it always bothered me that an ignition key has all these positions, and you can only one of them is good for an EV. What do you do when you turn it to, you can't really do much with that ignition switch. So I just thought, well, an EV really should just have a push button, because you don't need a key. So anyway, I decided to do that too. The next problem you're going to have is, where do those high current wires go? And how do you really make them safe? Now, cars have got all kinds of wires. You're going to have a 12-volt circuit, but you're going to have a lot of ugly, well, maybe you think they're beautiful, orange, welding cables. And where are you going to put them in the car? Because the chances are that you're going to have, let's say, the motor and the controller in the front of the car, and you're probably going to have a battery pack behind the seats, which means somehow you're going to have to run a cable from the front of the car to the back of the car. And in the Porsche, there was a great little tunnel that was in the Beck Speedster. Very, very convenient, exactly the right size, and all the cables just went right through that, and it was not a problem. In the Sonnet, it's got a flat pan. There's really no convenient way to get the cable from the motor bay or engine bay down in the bottom of the car. Plus, I'm not so sure I'd like to have a welding cable at the bottom of my car exposed. So you've got to figure out right away, as you begin to plan, where those cables going to go. The solution here was in the door, there's a little kind of gap where the carpet comes up. I had to drill through part of the chassis to get there with some strain relief, but it turns out it worked pretty well. The question is like, can you bend the cable enough to go and navigate through where you want to go? I don't know any other way to do this than actually have some welding cable and actually bend it and actually figure that out. So to really plan this one, you've got to buy some cable, unfortunately, or get some thick rope or something and try to figure out how that would actually fit. Wiring diagrams. How many of you are electrical engineers? Okay, so you can ignore this part. For those of you who are not electrical engineers and the whole thought of wiring makes you ill, you can still overcome that and build an EV. But I would strongly urge everybody who is not yet engaged in this to actually draw a wiring diagram before you wire. And by the way, after you are wiring it and you decide to change your wiring diagram, I strongly suggest you change the paper copy so you can remember what you've done. Ask me how I know this. This is the actual wiring diagram for the 12-volt system in the Sonnet. I got a little compulsive and decided to rip out every single wire in the Sonnet and do the entire thing over again primarily because it was a 1969 car. Many of the wires looked very frayed. A lot of the connectors were no good anymore. And I was convinced that the old relays, these old Bosch relays, were going to die on me any moment. So I decided to redo the whole thing, plus put LED lights in. And so with all that, frankly, it wasn't worth saving a single wire. I ripped it out, which gave me the opportunity to completely rewire the car the way I thought it should have been wired back in 1969. So I put in a modern fuse box, Ron Francis wiring. For those of you who have not yet discovered Ron Francis, has a great little box, this little thing up here. You can get, by the way, all this stuff is from the hot rod guys. I'm coming at this as from more of a car guy than a battery person, or but the hot rod guys have found a lot of this stuff already, and Ron Francis has a great little product, I think it's called the Bear panel or something like that. But it's just perfect for an EV because it has just the right amount of fuses you need and other terminals. It mounts very conveniently almost anywhere you want to put it. And it gives you the opportunity, if you want to completely rewire the car. And by the way, I'm not talking about a modern, 2013 Infiniti or BMW. I'm really talking about cars that have power nothing. No power windows, no power seats, no radio, no heater, no air conditioning, whatever it is, no automatic pressure gauges. I'm really talking about classic cars, or in the case of the 818, it's another minimalist car because I'm talking about the particular platform I'm interested in, which is basically high performance, two-seater lightweight cars, and you don't have all that stuff. If you want to instead convert something that's really complicated, you're back to the CAN bus and a lot of other things, and this may or may not be relevant. But in any case, I think it's a great idea to draw out your wiring diagrams in advance. If you're not an electrical engineer, find your cousin who is and have him look at it. And I also would strongly recommend 3 different wiring diagrams: the 12-volt, the high-power circuit, whatever that is, and the 5-volt control circuit. Instead of getting them all commingled, I have found it as I'm actually building the car, it's very, very helpful to be able to refer to these different systems because they're really, although you have a ground, 12-volt ground to the chassis, the other 2 systems are really self-enclosed. And so you can, it's pretty easy to draw them out as self-enclosed systems. By the way, that was also that product I told you before, the conceptual drawing software did that wiring diagram, and I can't find a better product to do that. So after doing this planning and minimal expenditure, I mean, we're talking about your $100 into this project, maybe $150 if you went ahead and bought that really, expensive little digital measuring device. Otherwise you're, $10 into this project. At this point, you can actually do some serious procurement planning and figure out what's going to go into this car. Again, I'm a little obsessive, but I like to know every nut and bolt that's going to go into this thing because actually you can save a lot of money by buying certain things together instead of going down to the hardware store to buy each bolt and nut, which will cost you about 10 times as much. So I like to really try to specify what's going into the car, and then where am I going to get this part? This is actually the procurement I've gone through with the 818. Now the 818 uses WRX running gear, Subaru running gear. Subaru is this odd world that I don't know much about, except they don't have part numbers. I guess they don't believe in that, or they want to keep it proprietary to the dealers. So you have to actually go through a fair a number of loops to figure out exactly what part you want and exactly what part number that is. And I like to take photographs because sometimes one part number mysteriously changes and morphs into another one, but it's the same part. If you get a donor car, which is what Factory 5 imagines that you're going to do, this is not an issue because you're simply taking parts out of the car. In the Factory 5 documentation, it says open up the door, take out the door latch, throw away the door. And they call it a door latch. Well, the door latch, what are we talking about here? Because it's a little different between the 2002 and the 2007. Is it a trivial difference? Does it really make a difference? And you don't want the 2008, and you don't want the one from the station wagon because that's different than the sedan, et cetera. You get the idea. So you got to figure out what parts you're really talking about. And here I'm just talking about non-EV parts. These are just parts that are going to go into the car to complete it, but obviously there's the EV components too. I find it very helpful to separate out the EV components from the other components. Why? Because in 99.9% of the cases, they're different vendors. I mean, maybe there's some exception somewhere, but you're going to buy most of the all the non-EV parts from the regular aftermarket auto guys. And you're going to be buying the EV parts from people who don't know what they don't even know, they've never heard of hot rodders. They're selling, you go to, DigiKey, or something like that. These are not automotive people, so you really want to separate that out. This leads you to the preliminary budget. I used to be the head in Massachusetts of the finance area. I was the chief secretary, and the entire state budget reported to me. So I do get a little obsessive about budgets, and I do believe in realistic budgets. So you really should have two budgets: the realistic budget, and then the budget that you show your significant other. So my wife is actually not here, and I would appreciate it if nobody contact her as I show this budget. I've met guys, these are mostly, hot rodder guys, and you overhear a conversation, well, how much did that cost you? And the guy says, well, I never really added up the receipts. The translation of that is, he never wanted to add up the receipts because he didn't want his wife to find out what the car actually cost. But this is my first take, based on a fairly detailed procurement exercise and a fairly detailed planning exercise of what the 818 is going to come in at. Now, first question, can you do it cheaper? Yeah, you can do it cheaper. Yeah. Can, what if you use a donor? Is it going to be better? Yeah, it's probably going to be less expensive. But I'm trying to hit a certain quality level. I want this to be either all new parts or completely reconditioned parts. So I've got a certain hurdle. You may have a different hurdle, but I'm just saying that's where this budget is. I believe this is going to be accurate, plus or minus $500. Yeah. Yeah, let me talk about the paint job in 1 second, because there's some things that are not in this budget. There's always footnotes to every budget, and I like lots of footnotes. The footnote here is it doesn't include labor, whatever that is. Sometimes you have to hire somebody to do something, like a welder if you don't know how to weld or something like that. It doesn't include whatever garage space, taxes, all the stamp taxes, miscellaneous things. It doesn't include all the gotchas you don't know about yet, like the unknowns. And in the particular case of this car, it does not include a paint job. Now, there's a reason why it's not in this budget for this particular car. For the Cobra came, and the way they make the fiberglass is that it has various kinds of forms, and you get big seams that come down the form, and you've got to sand that off, and you have to finish off the gel coat, for those of you who know about fiberglass, and you've got to also do a number of other things because, frankly, the original body that Factory 5 did was not period correct enough for me, so I finished off edges and so forth. And you actually had to paint the car because it looked like hell if you didn't. The 818, though, is the latest iteration of the technology of making fiberglass forms. I went to the Factory 5 open house, back about a month ago. I've actually seen and touched the car. They let me into the design R&D area, and I spent about 3 hours on the car with two of their senior engineers, and I got a pretty good handle about what this car looks like and what the finish is, and I can tell you that it's not a totally Concours AAA plus finish, but you know what? I would be happy driving this car around with no paint for a couple of years. Wouldn't bother me horribly. Now, I'm probably going to paint it, but I figured, I'm going to finish the car, and I don't need to put $5,000 in or $7,000 in for a paint job. It's going to come in white. If you can't stand white, then you better bump up your budget. But I believe, short of the paint job and short of the other footnotes here, that this is a pretty realistic $35,000 car for what I hope will be a mirror of a high-performance current standard car. Now, when I say current standard, this is a kit car that's designed for both street and track, but is not the same as a high-end Mercedes with all the bells and whistles and creature comforts. Okay, so I mean, it is what it is. It's kind of a reduced down sports car, reduced down for creature comforts. No heated seats, no nav system, all that kind of stuff. Special issues. As you're planning this, there are a couple things you need to be thoughtful about, because it's really helpful to think of this in advance than halfway through the build when you said, oh my God, you know, if I had only known that, I wouldn't have put X, Y, Z here. And there's not that many of them, but let me just touch on a few. One is the master cutoff switch. You got to have one. I actually have 2 cutoff switches. I like to do a cutoff switch and then a little toggle switch to cut off the 12-volt circuit for the DC to DC converter. Very convenient. Very convenient when you have no ignition key and all you have is a push button, because all I have to do when I leave the car is toggle off the DC converter, and I figure that most people, unless they're guys who came to this convention and are electrical engineers, you're never going to find that toggle switch. You won't know how to turn on the car. But you also need a master control, and you got to figure out where that's going to go. The charge port. What kind of charge port are you going to have, and where is it going to go? Both for a convenience point of view, for a safety point of view, and then a usage point of view. I'm really, really old school, and I like to go low weight. So for me, it's the 3-prong plug. I don't believe in fast charging. I figure I either want to charge the car in 4 minutes, or I'll just wait 8 hours. I'm not going to wait around 3 hours charging the car, doing anything. I mean, that's my use of the car. I'm either going to drive the range and charge it at home at night or someplace I'm going to stay, or you know, the fact that I can go to some level 2 whatever thing at some parking lot in some, you know, part of the city and recharge the car is just not, it's just unthinkable for me. For me. You may be different. You may want to have some high-end charge, and you might have something already set up. But you need to think about that. I like this OEM finish feel, which means emblems, labels. I like to have little labels that say high voltage, you know, because somebody might, some kid might open up the hood of the car, and I like them to look down and note that it's 650 volts before they're electrocuted in some way. It would be nice to do that. So some kind of labeling is something you should think about. And finally, you are putting oftentimes non-standard instrumentation into the dash. And you know, for all the automotive guys who are, you know, you're getting like your dashes, your instrumentation from Speed Hut, they already have great mounting systems because they know this is going to go into automotive dashes. The people who designed the JLD 404, I don't know who they are, but they probably never thought this was going to be in an automobile. They never thought it was going to be an automobile, which means it's not really designed for vibration. It's not really designed specifically for any kind of dash. In fact, it comes with a little tiny, you know, plastic surround, and I put it, you know, when I got the thing from Jack, I put it in the dash, and it kind of wobbled around, and I thought, you know, how the hell am I going to put this thing? And, you know, it had a little kind of clip, but I wasn't very confident that after about 100 miles, this thing wasn't going to be flopping around. And it's a fairly big piece of, you know, a big thing, but it's about the size of your fist. So you got to think about that as well. It turns out in the SAAB, there's a bulkhead in terms of the master, the cutoff switch, and that's where the gauge was for the fuel gauge, because you have to access that. If you're fortunate enough to have the car kind of pre-designed for a good place to put the cutoff switch, that's great. Otherwise, you're going to have to find the place for it in the Porsche. I put mine behind the rear seat in the passenger area. I can't remember where Jack put his, but you're going to put it different ways. You want to be able to reach it in an emergency from the driver's seat. You want it to be visible. I think you want it to be visible. You may not feel that way, but you've got to have the design considerations to figure that out. And the SAAB, you know, it went there. You get some drawings off the internet for what it looks like, figure out what the dimensions are. You can do all this pre-planning, and then you actually put it in, and the finish of it, I think it really came out very well, but you've got to have the thought to put into that. The charge port, you know, most of the time this is going to go where the gas tank was, except in the Porsche Jack had this great idea about putting it where the torsion bar cover was. You can fit a 3-prong plug there. You can't fit anything else there, though. I'm a 3-prong plug guy. It's fine for me. But if you're going to put a different kind of heavy-duty connector system, you're not going to probably be able to put it there either. The original Speedster, by the way, had a crazy way of filling up the gas tank, I think. You had to raise the hood. The gas tank was in the boot of the front of the car, and you had to fill the tank while the hood was up. And in the middle of the rain or something, I don't know what that would be like, and thinking about recharging it that way with an electric plug did not make me feel very good. So fortunately, there was the torsion bar. In terms of the Sonnet, I decided, yep, I'm going to put this where the gas fill was. Probably you're going to have to take the entire thing apart before you can figure out how you're actually going to wire it and how you're going to finish it off. Because it's going to be very unlikely that you'll find good enough engineering drawings of this part of the car because most of the time this is not a big repair item. So I had to take it all apart and figure out what I was going to do. Hopefully you can find something that's a standard, that will be a standard fit, but you may have to design something yourself to make it work. Emblems. In this day of digital technology and the internet, this is much easier to solve than it was a number of years ago. For the Sonnet, for example, I took the front hood emblem. I simply copied it on my scanner, my digital scanner. I traced the outline just using regular computer type digital technology. I came up with some new type. I found a guy on the internet who would make me one of these things, exactly the same dimension, same reverse print and everything else. $35, delivery in 4 days on the internet. It's amazing. Just amazing. I'm just totally astounded. There's now all these 3D printers and all these places. You can dream up all kinds of stuff, and you can have it, you can get the imaging for free, and you get the thing printed up. I just found out about this thing called iMaterialize. Did most of you know about that? I mean, I found out about this about 3 or 4 weeks ago. They have a whole way that you go in there and you can design something in 3D. You press a button and it will give you like 15 different materials that will be printed out in. Everything from platinum, believe it or not, through rubber. And you want ABS plastic, you want this, you want that, you want different colors, you want different sizes. You press it, you get an instant quote, and then they deliver it to you in 4 days. So, it's possible for really a modest amount of money. And by modest, I mean, under $100 to do a complete labeling program for your vehicle. So, but you have to think about where those labels are going to go and what you're going to do. And my favorite are the dash mounts. Again, technology can come to the rescue. You can actually modify or let me say enhance this instrumentation. By the way, I love this JDL 404. We need to make more progress like this in some other area. This is a fabulous piece of equipment, easy to install in terms of the wiring. A real pain to get it into the dash, in my opinion. But what I did was, I again used a conceptual drawing over on the left to think of some kind of, thing that coming from the back that was going to clamp it up against the fiberglass dash, like the other instrumentation that car guys are used to. But in this case, it's a rectangle, not a circle. And I had a friend who has a 3D printer, and my advice is to make a friend with somebody who has a 3D printer. These days, it's probably your neighbor or somebody. Everybody's got one of these things. Or if you really want, go buy a 3D printer. You can get one for $1,000 or something. And yeah, right there. That's a key insight, And he printed this thing off overnight, and we tested it out. We actually did a couple of versions. I made a little frame in the front, painted it with enamel paint, and that's the finished installation. It's great. Doesn't rattle. Fantastic, and so you can do stuff like that. My final pet peeve are the fuse mounts. I had a rather unfortunate near disaster. I made a bad assembly mistake. I put a washer between the battery, between the fuse and the cable. I don't know why I did this. I should have put, I have a Nord lock on the front, on the top, the bolt, the Nord lock, and then I put a washer in between. I don't know what I was thinking that day. I went out in the Sonnet, decided to do some speed trials, running 650 amps. I began to smell something that was like cheap Japanese electronic equipment. And I said, well, everything must be getting seeded in. I was in denial. Went a few more times, and the smell really started getting pretty bad. It smelled like it was coming from the rear of the car. I opened up the hood, the rear component, the rear compartment of the car, and my fuse holder had melted down to within a fraction of an inch of the metal chassis. Because it's made out of cheap plastic, it apparently does not have a very high heat resistance. And actually, if I had kept on driving, I would have had one hell of a ground leak, because 650 amps or something like that would have been going through the entire chassis. Now, I told you I like fiberglass cars. Fiberglass doesn't conduct electricity very well, and so a lot of the car wouldn't have been electrified, and I do have, insulation in the cockpit, but that wouldn't have been a happy day. So I decided to go back, and I didn't like the fuse mount anyway. But you can make your own stuff. This is basically made out of Delrin and nylon, and there's a few components like this. You can't buy these anywhere. You have to make them, but if you plan for it in advance, or unfortunately if you have a bad incident, plan for it afterwards, you can actually improve what the manufacturers have out there. Yes?
Now again, for me, all that is a little bit overwrought. It's okay to just take a car, go in the garage, and start pulling stuff out of it. You'll work it out. Somewhere between my approach, which is get a bigger hammer, although if you can't achieve a precision fit with a 3-pound sledge, don't force it. I've learned that the hard way. But there is perhaps a middle ground somewhere between writing a book on how to do it before you even start it, and just taking a car and swinging a sledgehammer at it. But it makes you aware of a lot of things that you're going to run into. I hope no one's dissuaded by all of that. It's all very doable work, but you'll be a little bit more knowledgeable going in, doing it his way. And so I thought we would show that. Brian, as I said, is in Florida, but in spirit, he's still with us. And in fact, to keep our show from not being 3 hours last week, I booted his Carmen Gia update down the road a little bit. He actually did get the motor installed after a couple of tries. And so let's take a look at what's going on with our own EVTV build of the electric 1974 Carmen Gia.
All right, so we showed you last week what we were doing with the Ghia, and most of it was inside the set, putting the motor together. So you kind of saw all of that. You actually saw a lot of it. You saw the encoder come out of the motor, because we had to replace this end bell, get those B-face holes all lined up, put the adapter on, flywheel, clutch, pressure plate that had been balanced. So now we've got it on its stand and got it out here at the back of the car. A couple of the things that we didn't show you last week that we had done is we have now the lights done. We did pass the state inspection, but there's a lot of issues. One of the wires was just kind of peeled off and held together. Charlie, you want to give them let them see a turn signal here? We've got turn signals. There we go. Other one there, is that? Yeah. Got the other one on?
Yeah.
Nope. Well, see, we got a problem. That's why we test everything. But we don't have that turn signal. So we've got a couple of issues still. We've got LED bulbs populating all of the rear. I'm having an issue with putting two LEDs on the same circuit and getting the flasher to work. And we went to a newer flasher, an electronic over the mechanical. It's helped, but it didn't exactly cure it. We also had the license plate light repainted, and I went ahead and finished rebuilding that with new lenses. They were all painted over from a God knows how many generations, and new gaskets for that. And that is our historic plate here from the state of Missouri. So that kind of brings you up to a little bit of what we've been doing that we really didn't show you last week. So the motor's here, and we need to do some cutting on the back of the car. Not quite as severe, I don't think, as we needed to do on the Thing, which is over here. It's one taillight's in the shop. This motor is with the VW adapter. So from face to the end bell, let's just call the encoder, the wires, 20.5 inches. So that's 20.5. If I put 20.5 here from the face of the transmission, that puts me right about here. That's metal. That's not air. So we also need to probably cut out a little extra because we've got to slide this thing up in. We've got to get it beyond the input shaft of the transmission, which sticks out, maybe 3/4 of an inch or an inch before we can locate it on this end. We do have a little play where we can get the shaft, bring the motor up, and then probably elevate the rear end of it and get it level, because that's one of the things when you put a VW engine, in this case a motor with a VW adapter on it, is you want it to go in straight. You also, at some point, if it doesn't go in, a couple of things could happen. One is just your splines are not lining up, so don't be afraid to pull it back a tiny bit and rotate this because just one spline. The other thing is, I showed you when we talked about the pressure plate, is if you have left the collar on here, and I showed you how to take that off on your diaphragm, on your pressure plate, and you have the late style throwout bearing, you're never going to be able to pull that, to pull the motor together up to the transmission, because that's going to take about maybe a 1/2 inch. You'll just never do it. You'll fight with it. So make sure that you do, especially if you have the late model transmission. The way you can tell 71 and later, it has that sleeve, the guide sleeve. It also uses the late style throwout bearing, and you do not want to have that collar on here. And I showed you back maybe a month ago or so. We talked quite a bit about pressure plates and discs and how you take that off. So we're going to have to do some cutting, and what we're going to do is we're going to take a little, it was suggested that we do this at an angle so that it's not quite much of a hinge as if we do it straight, and I'm all for that. We're going to cut it all the way down, give ourselves probably more clearance than we need. We'll end up with probably 15 inches of clearance on the front and end up with about a 10 or 11 at the rear, which is fine. We're going to end up taking this entire section out, but we're going to leave the body work under here. Probably don't want to weld it back in because we may need to do this again. So we will figure out something. We don't know how high this is going to protrude, but I'm assuming that we're going to end up losing our rear deck latching mechanism. There's really no way in a painted deck lid to relocate that. So I don't know. There's latches, there's straps. You know, we've kind of gone after the vintage look with this car with the not really rat rod, because we do like paint. We don't really like rust. But we might be able to use some type of strapping mechanism, leather straps, maybe keep in with that, you know, like the big belt buckles used to use on some British cars to hold the hood down. So we'll figure out something kind of cool, or how we can do this. We may be able to relocate something. do it with a solenoid. I don't know yet. That's how I did it in my Ghia for the deck lids, but I didn't have to modify anything. So that brings you up to speed. I guess the next thing that we can do is find a volunteer out there in EVTV land to do some cutting, and I guess we'll just show you sparks and all the noise. I think you guys kind of like that. I mean, 4th of July is still, 7 months away, so let's just make some fireworks here in the shop at EVTV. All right, so we've got Charlie here. Oh yeah, that sounds like a heck of a tool. So he's going to go ahead and use the RotoZip, and Charlie's an old hand at this, and I'm going to get out of the scene because I hate the sight of blood, especially my own. So Charlie, you have at it. Cut. Okay, we'll do
Sunni. Charter one Lord, sure son of a gun. Tartar Sadube. Two's eyes at Zod again, Quine. Why Jan G. Pew, sure pin liquor both fang. Why she Jan Young Boo one. Can you Lancy hone you? Boo Young Kang, Simu La. You know what I'm saying?
Get Charter Internet for only $29.99 per month. Charter. Make way for
I'm
more.
back at the back of the car here with Charlie, and you've seen Charlie here. He does all kinds of stuff for us. He's master cabinet maker, plumber, electrician, and cutter, huh, Charlie? He can cut anything. So he's got a abrasive cutter here, and we're going to go ahead and just take our time and kind of pop that out. I'm going to back out. Hopefully you'll pick up the sound, because as I just, I don't, sight of somebody else's blood, I'm okay. So go for it, Charlie. That kind of went through pretty good there, Charlie. I kind of like that.
I kind of made it straight. Boy, that was crooked. Right
That
there.
no, that's fine. You're Charlie can do plumb and level. And now we're going to take a cut along the front. Is that right, Charlie?
Yep.
Okay, so there's a lip in here where this goes, so we're going to stay on the other side of that and see if we can hold this car together. Well, that's pretty cool, Charlie. Looks like you got a piece of Volkswagen here. See, and this is what we were talking about, is this is where the latch mounts on. We kept the body intact here, I think. Yeah, kind of for the most part. And I think now we've got a big enough hole to pop that motor. And I think what we'll do is just kind of show you what we got going. I guess we may have to get the bolts. I don't know if I have bolts here long enough to do that motor. Well, let's take a look anyway and just kind of see what we've got for clearance, just for giggles. All right, well, I'm back. You can't tell how long it's been since I did the last bit of this video today, but it's probably been an hour and a half or 2 hours. We figured out how this motor is going to have to go in and kind of spared you the me the shame and you the pain of going through all that. But we're going to put it in from the top, coming in from underneath. We've got the three phases that are really in the way. We had to reposition it on the jack, but we're going to bring it in from the top and set it down like this, drop it into the space, and then get it on the shaft. How do we know that? Well, we've already been there once. We've had this thing in. We didn't get the splines aligned and slide it in because we noticed that we had a problem. The adapter plate here for the transmission side is, you know, marked top, and I appreciate top markings when they say top, because then I know that that would be the top. Now, if you have those markings off by 90 degrees and top is not the top anymore, that means top would be the side or the bottom. How would you know? Well, you know when you slide it all up in there and the bolt holes don't line up on your transmission. So, excuse me, but the top markings were off by 90 degrees. You can't see it, but they're here. These are the top markings. And how do you know? In a VW transmission, the top bolt holes are actually a little bit closer. They're, I don't know what the metric equivalent is, but let's say it's 7 3/4 instead of 8 1/4 or 8 1/2. So there is a certain way these adapter plates go on. I could have saved myself a lot of trouble by just putting the adapter plate up there days ago, even before last week's show, and just seeing if the bolt holes lined up and if top was really where top was. So let me just give you a little word of caution, and you can follow it or not. Even if you buy the adapter plate from us, don't trust the top is always where it's marked. Go ahead if you can, and before you put your adapter plate onto your motor and have to reinstall it and deinstall it and reinstall it, again, just put it up and see if the bolt holes lined up. Guess what I did this time? I put it up there and made sure the bolt holes line up. So don't do what Brian does, do what Brian says, and just check them. Anyway, we're at the point now where we're going to do this. We will, we've got to make a little minor fix to our cover for our starter, this aluminum. It's not quite lining up, but that's cool. We'll just go ahead and take a rat tail file and open that up a little bit. But you can see the motor is in. You can kind of understand what we're planning, which is to drop the car a little, rotate the motor, have to point it down a little bit. Then we'll bring the rear end of this thing down in line, and then we've cleared this, and then we'll go ahead and slide it in. So some of it you're going to have to imagine. You may need an imaginary friend for that, or we'll show you what we can here. A lot of it's going to be, you know, what do they call it? Something in elbows. So we'll spare you some of it, but we'll show you some grunting and groaning in the middle of that. And we will catch up with you here at the install.
Making electric boats isn't just making boats cleaner, it's making boats better. Being out in an electric boat means you can enjoy the environment you're in. You are so much more immersed in the sound and the experience of the aquatic life, of the water, of the wind, than you would otherwise be. And it really gives you a new level of understanding and enjoyment of that generally beautiful nature area you've gone into to enjoy yourself. What an electric motor does is that it gives you all this power in a vibrationless, soundless way. A well thought out, well designed system has 100% of the torque available all the time. You don't have to build up to it, you have it. So when you pump the throttle, you are out there and your whole shot is amazing. It takes your center of gravity right out from under you, and it gives people that what they call the EV grin. You just start laughing, you can't help it. You're so conditioned to think that you first need vibration, then need noise, and then you start going somewhere. And in this case, your center of gravity just shoots right out from under you. And it's a wonderful feeling. You can still talk to each other. You're hearing the sound of the water and the wind and the waves instead of just hearing engine noise and vibrations. And it gives you really a chance to be in tune with that nature that you're actually out there to enjoy. Plus, not having to visit the pump is actually a great thing. Your battery will eat electricity from any source that you provide. I mean, who loves sitting around on your knees with a jerry can? We have better control over the boat. We have a better experience while we're out driving. Plus, we also have the knowledge that we're part of new technology. It is just way cool. Our mission is to make beautiful, fast, and fun electric boats. There's nothing more fun than taking these new technological developments and putting them into classic designs and having people shoot away with a big smile and an EV grin.
All right, so we're recording. This is Preston. Preston's here hanging out with us now. We're putting, he is actually the one that bought the Carmen Gia engine, right? Yep. Yeah, bought the Carmen Gia engine, so he's an avowed bug enthusiast, so this is a Carmen Gia. It's close enough and it makes him awfully enthusiastic. So we've got the motor in place. You can see that we're doing it from the top. The second time around is a little easier, maybe. We'll see if this thing slips in. So as we drop it down, we're going to go ahead and lower the rear end of this a little bit, but we've cleared the input shaft and we're going to see if we can get this lined up. So just bear with us. You may or may not be able to see anything. All right, so let's go ahead and drop it a little bit. Okay, leave it right there for a sec. Okay, how are we doing on the shaft? Just give me a...
Actually, we dropped down about another inch and we should be right up to it.
Okay, so go ahead and... Okay, hold that right there. We should be pretty good, right?
Yep.
Okay, let me lower the rear of the motor, which means we're going to have to, as we do this, we're going to have to drop it a little. There we go. Okay, I think I can just lower the rear now. You go ahead and lower the, yep. Okay, that's fairly level. We're still not there. We are just not there. We're at quite a bit of an angle, aren't we?
Yeah.
And we're not hitting anything.
Drop it down a little bit more.
Go ahead and drop it down now. Yeah. Keep on going. There. Hold that right there. Lift it just the tiniest bit. Okay, now. Take a look at the front and see what you're seeing there. Where the how straight are we? We're pretty angled, aren't we?
Well, if we drop the back end about another quarter inch to a half inch.
Why is it not dropping? I'm not able to get the back end to drop. Did you drop the whole thing?
Yeah, I'll drop it down a little bit and then even it out a little bit more.
See what I'm not able to do for some reason is get this. So what are we at too weird of an angle? We're not going in straight?
I think we got to drop it down just a tad. Wow, yeah, that whole top too.
And we still need to drop it down a little? Okay, now where are we? Are we out?
Yeah, we're pulled out.
Are we in?
Yep, we're on it.
try?
Dropping a little.
Oh, I see. Okay. So we're hitting it with the flywheels. Drop it just a tiny bit. Go ahead. Okay.
There we go.
All right. I hate it when a plan comes together, except when it comes together. So we have the motor in. It's telling me that we've got some major issues here. We can definitely close the deck lid on the Ghia, but as far as putting this back in, we may be able to. It's actually, we may be able to cut this and get this latch back in there. So we will play with that. Sorry, didn't mean to give you my back there. But I think we've got it in there. Way to go. Good job. All right. We think we've got this where we can secure it up. We will catch up with you later, but mission accomplished in terms of getting the motor in. Just had a little mishap with mismarking, so if you can, check that. Like I said, even if you buy it from us, make sure that you check it because we're not perfect. All right, we'll see you then. Carmen Gia update, over.
And there you have it. So we have Otmar doing a fascinating conversion of a Vanagon. By the way, I had backed out of our purchase of the DOKA Dopplekabine from Otmar and noted that. One of you should have grabbed it. Otmar was quite out of sorts with me about it, that I had a mere 2 months earlier said that I might be interested in it, and then kind of backed out. So we sent him a check Friday, and we are going to be receiving the DOKA, and are going to do that as a build. It's going to be down the road a little bit. I think it's going to take a little rust and paint work, which we're just not going to have as part of our process around here anymore. We'll send that out of shop to be done, and a little bit of running gear work, and then we're going to try to do a Siemens motor transplant and our JevQ and get that rolling pretty nicely. And part of our growing VW fleet done in baby shit yellow, as always. And so the VW thing and the DOKA or Dopplekabine will be stablemates at that point in the same yellow and black colors, and I'm very pleased with that. It's in fact, I'm glad he shoved me over the edge on it. I really didn't need another build or another expense at this point. Part of the confusion was I thought he was doing us a tremendous favor, and that I was doing you all a tremendous one, which you rather failed to jump on. Otmar thinks there's probably 200 of these in the country. I think maybe 100. And the reason is the chicken tax. In 1963, Germany leveled a tax on American chickens of about 25%. And the Johnson administration responded with a 25% tariff against their at that time, they were the world premier builder of very small, light commercial vehicles, little pickups and vans and so forth. And believe it or not, that tax is still in force, and that tariff. And so there was never a single Dopplekabine imported in the United States officially. So individuals have brought them in. A few have leaked in through Canada or Mexico. And over the years, there have been a few. The Type 3 Dopplekabine, or DOKA, I guess, was manufactured from 1980 to 1991. This is a 1990 model. Pretty straight body, some rust, some running gear issues, and we'll work all that out pretty easily, I think. Should wind up with a, as I pointed out when Richard Van Wyhe did this, It's just a perfect vehicle for electric conversion, I think, and for running around town, delivering parts, picking up hardware, lumber, so forth. This just is as good as it gets. I think we can make a bang-up conversion out of this for about no money, and get it going. But because of its rarity, it never occurred to me that Otmar would foresee any difficulty turning this vehicle into cash. They're just sought after. The fully restored on the SAMBA. These things go between $50,000 and $70,000. He was asking $13,000 for kind of working girl version, but certainly a straight body, no major damage. It was in pretty good shape all around. And so I didn't realize we had committed some faux pas. Having discovered that we had, in fact, I have moved swiftly to correct it and in decimal. And so he's already gotten a check for the full amount, and we'll arrange shipment at his convenience where we're going to actually park it. I'm a little vague on at the moment, but we'll find some space or put it down at the airport or something in the meantime. So that's that. Been doing some work on the thing and gotten our contactors replaced again. They had changed the software on the Jehu version 2 without quite noting that. And we had since used those pins to do our pre-charge, and so it didn't pre-charge, and we wound up with 2 blown contactors again. I've got our Jehu Model 4 set up on the test bench to do that, and it seems to be doing it very well. We'll transplant that next week, and maybe spin some wheels again on the VW thing and work with the mapping of the throttle via the website wirelessly and play with that a little bit. I should have 27 in a week. We've ordered a cable harness for it, a full harness with 6 feet of wire for every pin on it, whether you use them or not. And like I say, we've got this little, kind of a pin out on a metal plate that will mount on our very nice little enclosure with our 35-pin amp seal. Of course, we'll have our USB back here and an antenna for the wireless. So, a smaller package than what we have in the thing right now. And hopefully that will get us launched in actually moving the DMOC 645 and Siemens motor from an experimental classification into something you can actually use in a car. And I think that'll be good times for us. I certainly still have a lot of DMOCs to move. I had picked up some more of them. I think we have about 40 of them at this point, and 140 motors. And so I need to move some of that hardware if we're to continue life here at EVTV. But I still have to do the documentation on the Jehu. That's going to be an adventure. But we're coming along. So, to our friends in the Tesla Motors Forum, there's plenty of people working on very excellent conversions, and we're having a lot of fun. You get to drive somebody else's car. True, it's a very nice one. We get to drive our cars, and they're even nicer. Stay with us. I think next week we will probably start another year of EVTV and doing electric vehicles the electric way. If you are at all confused as to why we do this, and I confess sometimes I am, Nova has a documentary about the melting of ice right now that's being shown on cable. But you can always find it on the Nova website, I'm sure. But this documentary on ice goes on an hour and a half, and about 3/4 of the way through it, a lot of things will change for you. And it's visually just gorgeous to watch, so I recommend it highly. Take a look at Nova's ice documentary and let me know what you think about that stuff. Meanwhile, hopefully Brian will be back next week, and we'll continue in a new year with 2014 and EVTV. Stay with us.